All right, thanks a lot for joining us on another episode of AWS for Data. And I'm joined by two esteemed colleagues here today from Amazon Web Services and Amazon on the area of sustainability. For those who are joining fresh to this channel, my name is Jason Young and I sit within the data and AI strategy team here. And we'll be really interested in the next 15 to 20 minutes to talk about one of the areas of data and AI that a lot of companies have been trying to nail down but haven't really been able to get the right value in terms of how to look about sustainability and energy transition. I'll throw it over to our guest. So would you like to introduce yourself, Hillary?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Hillary and I lead sustainability for EMEA. While we have our operational sustainability team and infrastructure and our broader worldwide Amazon sustainability team, I sit within our commercial sales org, helping customers accelerate their sustainability goals using AWS, but more excitingly, innovating new solutions around sustainability. So super excited to be here. I've been with AWS for 3 years now. Time flies when you're having fun. But in the sustainability space for around 15 years now, having worked both in-house and consulting all across sustainability, all the way to really looking at the power of communications to drive sustainability as a topic. So bringing a lot of kind of cross-sector, public-private sector type insight to hopefully share with you all today.
Fantastic.
Hi everyone, my name is Carol Yan. I lead our UKI Energy and Utilities practice for AWS. As it relates to sustainability in my world, that typically means we're talking about renewable energy and a lot of the organizations as well as our own journey to net zero. But it also means when organizations are thinking about applying AI and using resources to then drive sustainable operations, more resilient grids so that they can deliver outcomes to end customers at home. So it's a really exciting topic because I personally believe that the UKI is at the forefront of building some of these AI-enabled platforms to drive sustainable operations and impact to the customers. So delighted to be here.
No, thanks a lot for joining us today in the room. But I guess let's go with the heavy hitter in terms of the question around sustainability. So from the both of you, do you feel sustainability has been heightened in the past few years in terms of where organizations have prioritized it, or potentially is sustainability dead? So I'll throw it over to yourself, Hillary. What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, maybe we'll just dive right in. And I think, with the political landscape that we're seeing across the pond and around the world, I think I have been getting that question of where is sustainability today? And for me, it's really not the end of sustainability because sustainability is not a trend. It's really the evolution where we're seeing sustainability being built into core business strategy, where folks are looking at it in a much more strategic way. How do we unlock business value? Sustainability needs to be affecting your top or bottom line. And that's really how we're seeing more of that progress as opposed to maybe back in the 2010s where we've had a lot of public commitments and bold visions and goals. Now we're getting down to execution and implementation, going from just reporting and talking the talk to actually taking the action. So I think that's where today's conversation around the role of data and AI to get us into that next phase of sustainability is where it's at.
Yeah. Any kind of anecdotal thoughts on what you're seeing on the ground, Carol?
Yeah, and I think when I take that question, is sustainability dead? I think the question that I get is renewables dead, right? Of the subset segment, and I think when we're taking a look at the geopolitical noise, we'll call it, in terms of what's going on globally, in terms of maybe the adverse reaction to renewables, some of the major players going backwards on their commitment to renewables and carbon-free energy. There's an assumption that maybe we're starting to go backwards, but then we take a look at the data, right? And I think if we take a look at the data, the UKI for the first time in 2024, renewable energy exceeded all other types of energy. It was 50.8% of renewable energy, and 29% of that was wind. And so I think when we take a look at the noise versus actually what's happening on the ground, that's what's signaling the shift of it's still absolutely a priority. Companies are investing into it quite heavily. The challenge and the opportunity that we have as AWS is helping customers, though, navigate what is a very increasingly complex world of deploying renewable infrastructure, deploying renewable energy to drive to those net zero goals, and do it in a way that's digitally native as much as they can be when we're talking about big renewable assets, applying data platforms so that as they're deploying infrastructure, they're able to reap the rewards of the data that they can then pull out and use, and actually figure out how to do that with more limited capital than some of the other energy sources, right? And so it becomes a game of how do you innovate within the constraints you're given day to day, and then how do we as AWS help organizations do that?
Yeah. One interesting thing I'd be interested to hear is that, we talk a lot about sustainability. You talked about reporting as well. Do we, as, both Amazon Web Services, feel that we've got a good grasp in terms of whether or not sustainability, if you really focus on it, is actually driving that bottom line, the business value? The reason why we say that is that ultimately organizations need to be able to, project their targets. They have to be answerable to shareholders. Has there been a shift in terms of the mindset of sustainability, of doing it for the sake of it versus is doing sustainability right going to actually impact that bottom line? Like, how much are organizations making that shift, actually seeing it enable their business to grow as opposed to doing sustainability for the sake of it?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and a question that sustainability leaders are answering all around the world. And it's really seeing sustainability as the same conversation as optimization and efficiency. So from that cost savings perspective, it's efficiency drivers that we're seeing across organizations that are asking for this from us each and every day, but now through the lens of sustainability and enabled by technology, how much can we do further and faster? But from the innovation perspective, we're seeing some stats around 69% of CEOs are now seeing sustainability as an innovation growth driver. And for EMEA, the market size opportunity for sustainability solutions across hardware, software, services, it's about 104 billion euros. So we're starting to see that in terms of the market landscape and the addressable market in that space. Where we're really starting to see it, I think back to that innovation piece, is customers who are really working with AWS and leveraging not just our technology capabilities, but our culture of innovation, our tried and tested, working backwards, customer obsession approach to innovating and creating these solutions that don't yet exist. And so I think that's where we're really seeing the conversation from seeing sustainability as a cost center, cost savings at best, to this path towards value creation, unlocking new revenue and opening new markets. So, yeah.
Yeah, and look, I mean, one of the things that we've always seen, my background is in financial services for the past 20 years, and coming to Amazon Web Services has really opened up the doors in terms of understanding that a lot of the challenges in banking financial services actually is cross-industry. And when we think about sustainability, one of the things that I always think about is compliance, right? You think about compliance as being, well, it's a means to an end, like you have to do it. But we're seeing a big mindset shift in terms of compliance enabling that innovation. It sounds like sustainability is going through that innovation cycle right now, where if you do it right, it's going to open up so many windows and so many doors. I'm interested to hear your thoughts, Carol, in terms of using sustainability as an innovator. Do you think it is more successful with smaller organizations, like the more nimble organizations, or is it a bigger opportunity for large organizations that have a lot more of the data? I'd be interested to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, one of our customers that we're really always delighted to share a stage on, because I think they really truly embody the started as a startup and then now is global scale, and that of course is our friends at Octopus Energy. I mean, if you hear their story, Greg Jackson as well as James Edison, when they first founded the organization, like yourselves, they came from FSI, they came from a different organization. They saw an opportunity specifically in energy, specifically in the field of how do we create a platform that actually helps energy companies and help customers ultimately be able to get more renewable energy, the energy that they want in their homes, and how do we enable that with tech? And so they talk all the time about when they started and they realized that they needed to create a platform. They also had to run an energy company to be able to deliver the results. So they, like AWS, created a platform that they used themselves first, right? So they had to innovate and figure out, how do they disrupt the market? They're basically unknowns coming into a highly fragmented, highly competitive market with a lot of legacy stalwarts. So how do they come in and actually even be competitive, step one? And then how do they use technology to be their differentiator, right? And fast forward 9 years, they're now the largest energy retailer in the UK. I mean, I think if we take a look at their innovation journey, it was all on AWS, so we're very proud of that, but B, they talk a lot about how they're able to find a niche space, particularly in a space that maybe was a bit untapped. And I think that's kind of the angle that I've always really loved about when you apply sustainability in a commercial sense of it creates these new opportunities that didn't really exist before. And if you're able to accelerate very quickly with tech, then you can get to that untapped market. And so now they're starting to now innovate and create net new products. So not only do they have their core Kraken platform product that they're now selling to other energy retailers in Europe and globally, they've also created a product in Flex. So their Kraken Flex, which is their flexibility platform, which now ties back to the sustainability story again of as at a macro trend perspective, as more and more consumers are starting to introduce things like heat pumps, EVs, more independently generated, distributed energy resource type products. Well, how do you actually manage that at a grid level? And they all of a sudden identified there's a gap here because a lot of the grid operators aren't equipped to be able to manage that and control that. Well, they can create a product using technology to be able to actually then be able to manage the grid and make sure we don't have blackouts and make sure everyone has access to the energy they need when they need it. And so it becomes a really exciting proposition of how do you find the space, the untapped white space? How do you then apply both technology but also innovative and ways of working to then be able to then launch a product, which then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of then driving more sustainable energy into the grid and being able to actually sustain that with customers. So I think it's just a super exciting story.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's like a great example to really bring to life that trend we are seeing, which is, enterprise customers looking to solve a problem for themselves, innovating with AWS. And if you're building something to solve for yourself, it might be seen as a cost center, but it also means that others in your industry or even cross-industry is also looking for a solution. And that's where I think our approach to commercial sustainability really kicks in, which is, hey, how are we thinking about productization, commercialization, in some instances, open sourcing if you're feeling generous. And financial services, I think, is one of those industries that are very far ahead because they're not in denial. They know what's coming down the line from a regulatory perspective. And in addressing their risks and liability, most of that is in their portfolios. They're also able to provide a better customer experience by being proactive with new financial products and services. And I think that's where some of the appeal of working with AWS is when it comes to not just building solutions with us and co-innovating together, but how do we scale and be successful and have that intended impact? So that's where, things like AWS Marketplace, or sometimes it's not a solution or a product, it's really the value of the data. If you have, commercially valuable data, AWS Data Exchange is a great place to both list and buy. So if you have leaders who are not completely convinced about the value of sustainability, that's a great way in. But also, in terms of a two-pronged data approach, there is data that should be public good that is going to help us advance our understanding and progress on these really important topics. And that's where we have the Amazon Sustainability Data Initiative, where researchers, academia, they can access large data sets that are weather sustainability related to be able to advance the subject. So I think that's where, looking across the kind of landscape when it comes to the value of data all the way to how that data is utilized for insight and ultimately intelligence and action, that's where it gets super exciting for us.
Yeah. And actually one interesting thing that you've just mentioned is around, being able to access open data to be able to share freely, what other organizations are doing. I'd be interested to get the take of both of you around, when we talk about sustainability as a group initiative, like everyone's been at university and whenever you do group projects, there's always going to be that one person who leads the charge and then everyone follows. Where are we right now with sustainability around like one or two particular stalwarts leading the charge and others following? Do you think that there is that group mindset of let's let them lead the charge and then we'll follow? Or do you think there's clear pathways for everyone to kind of go with their own direction? Like how are we seeing the current zeitgeist of sustainability at the moment? And I'd also be interested to hear about like just expanding that to more about the government side of things. How much is the government and also the public sector leading the charge and then the private operators then, following, or is it vice versa?
Yeah.
Sure, I can start. So I think from an energy lens, in terms of the data sharing, the ecosystem, it's becoming more and more complex, right? And I think there's a recognition that as companies start to digitalize, and once they start investing in their data AI journey, the next thing that happens is then their data is in a silo and it can't be accessed by anyone, right? And there might be some good reasons, but then you start to challenge, you challenge some of that thinking to say, well, for us to be able to harmonize at a macro level, to really understand data inflows, energy inflows, we need to be able to share the appropriate level of data. And so there are initiatives in the energy space in particular on data sharing and that NISO is doing, and that's obviously a government-supported initiative, as well as we're starting to see things like with the Mercury Consortium, which they're trying to take and create. I think they say the Bluetooth of interoperability and device standardization, because as you start to introduce more players in this system, and they're all operating on different standards, how do you start to think about where are the connections that they need to make, and how do they find these platforms to be able to share data in a better way? And I think, Hillary, what you had shared, and we've collaborated on some of these initiatives, is sharing some of the thinking, right? So sharing best practices from outside other industries to say, here's how financial services have shared data in ways that, share the things that you want to be shared and protect the things that you don't. And it helps create a culture, I think, of how do we actually take a look at this as an industry level, and how do we solve the problem together in a more collaborative spirit? And that's, I think, building new muscle for a lot of our customers. I think the role that we actually play is really important, in that we're the convening body often, right? We're the ones that are kind of holding down the fort in the conversation, saying, no, we all believe that there's something to be gained by working together and collaborating, and here's the end vision. For my customers, it's usually always about how do you drive outcomes better for the end customer, the end of the day, so someone who's turning on and off the electricity switch. But then you kind of peel those layers back, and at the data sharing level, how do we incentivize the right players to work together? We play a really important role in driving, raising the bar and setting that expectation of what good can look like at an industry level, but then also providing the technology, architecture, and foundations for them to actually be able to do that, right? If you dream it, you can do it, but there's different layers to all of that. So I think, at least from my customers, they're still going on a journey of how do you combine, the concepts of innovation and data sharing in a very complex, highly regulated, highly fractured world, and how do you do that both fast and at scale? These are all things that are, intuitively kind of crashing in on each other in terms of things that you don't typically in the industry haven't seen, but we have to, because we have to move much faster.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think definitely the word of, the times is really collaboration, because as we're looking across even our own supply chains, a lot of our impact and our scope 3 exists within our suppliers. And we're starting to even see the framing of suppliers transform into partnership in the broader sense, because you can't tackle it as one single organization. And I think from what we're seeing across customers is we are seeing, some of the folks that are the born goods, I like to call them, especially in our nature and climate tech startup space, but also the born agains, which are large organizations really looking to lean into the topic and really looking at how they can become future fit in an increasingly carbon intense, resource constrained reality. And regulation and frameworks has really been a tailwind in organizations really taking this seriously, especially across Europe. We have the EU taxonomy and the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that starts to put in those frameworks, on top of things like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures and one for nature as well. I think in the nature space, and even more broadly, overall, a lot of these frameworks are exactly what it is, which is frameworks. And we're seeing those first movers, those larger enterprises who want to set the standards, because depending on your industry and where you're looking at it, those frameworks do not go down to that granular level of, the types of reporting metrics, and it's going to differ across the board quite vastly. And I think especially in the kind of nature and biodiversity space, we're seeing organizations really want to take the lead in setting that standard and defining those metrics that will also pave the way for other players within that industry. And I think, here in the UK, we have an amazing partnership with the Natural History Museum, and they have a great biodiversity intactness index. And we're seeing, again, organizations really looking at that from a biodiversity space. But I think from a regulatory perspective, these frameworks and requirements are going to continue iterating based on what they're seeing industry come back with. So we do see that for those first movers, there is definitely that advantage in setting the standards to be specific to that industry in a way that adequately captures their impact, but also the potential to innovate and unlock some of those opportunities. But I think maybe just a quick one on that kind of interoperability that we're talking about cross-industry or within an industry. We're seeing sometimes the challenge, within organizations. And a lot of this regulation has driven a once-in-a-generation data transformation where a lot of this operational, non-financial data that's been literally sitting at the desks of sustainability reporting managers are now coming online for the first time. And in addition to reporting, what can all of that data tell you about a better customer experience, or how will it feed into R&D in terms of your products and services? So I think that connection between operational data to that commercial advantage, building it into business value, that connection has yet to be made. And I think things like, we have some guidance around building a sustainability data fabric or data foundation, where a lot of kind of traditional sustainability reporting has been really dependent on the use case. If you're collecting data on sustainable buildings or water management, often there's duplication because you're talking to the same suppliers or the same stakeholders internally. Versus if you look at it from a data foundation perspective, and you have some of those best practice data management capabilities built in from, how we ensure it's secure, even basic things like access control, because as this data comes online for the first time, so are many users, all the way to things like data lineage. We know in sustainability, as we get better quality data, sometimes our performance or impact might go up before it goes down. And all of this is really helping, folks look at, actually, if we have this foundation, depending on whatever use case, whether it's operational or commercial, we can draw from it. And it really paves the way for any sort of AI acceleration because it doesn't go from zero to AI. So we're seeing, again, regulation even transforming the data landscape within internal sustainability teams. So they're thinking about their reporting strategy, but more importantly, they're thinking about their data and digital strategy as well.
And I'm glad that, we've gotten to, halfway into this episode, and AI has now been, one of the big discussion topics around how we unlock that data. And, certainly for our audience here who are experimenting with AI, with different tools that are available, it is able to really make noise of data into something that can be interpretable and then actionable. I'm interested to hear, though, in terms of the domain, you've talked a lot about taxonomy and frameworks of sustainability. I imagine it's not easy just to fit in AI and then give you all the sustainability kind of metrics and what you need to take as an action. And what you've also mentioned as well is that you need to understand the use cases of sustainability as well. So how much of a challenge is there in organizations to build the right kind of muscle or the data literacy on what sustainability is? So as you said, if a sustainability officer is now giving that data freely to people, Is there a challenge in terms of the average person consuming that data to really make sense of it? Even if you were to tell them this is what the data tells you, is there a bit of a literacy challenge in terms of what does it mean to their day job in terms of sustainability? Is there a challenge around people understanding the message? I'd be interested to hear about that.
Yeah, I think definitely there is a kind of understanding gap, especially as the sustainability domain becomes embedded into every part of an organization. You know, whether you're in marketing, whether you're in sales, procurement, supply chain, now everyone is being asked to, you know, build that sustainability muscle and flex. So I think there is a huge potential when it comes to AI. Even, you know, we talked a lot about reporting. We have some amazing partners who are leveraging things like agentic Gen AI to help reduce the reporting cycle to save, you know, 75% of the time that would have been used otherwise. One of the partners, they're called Gardenia Technologies. But I think internally we're starting to see folks, I mean, even speaking for myself, how can we leverage some of these AI tools to be able to shortcut and really transform the kind of sustainability function, which was once a function that was very creative and strategic and innovative, that in the last, you know, couple of years has turned into, you know, a data trawling and analysis function to back to what we do best, which is helping folks understand the potential interventions and the impact, and then to be able to really embed that as a part of corporate culture, but to then be able to report back on the, you know, social, environmental, and financial impact. But I think there is the potential for AI to actually be able to, you know, expand this domain expertise in sustainability to other functions as well. So I think there's definitely that understanding challenge, but we're starting to see, you know, again, maybe back to the museum example, you know, we're seeing, even though science and technology, those domains, you know, all part of STEM, there's actually a translation challenge there. And so how can we use things like natural language query so that folks can actually, you know, apply and use that data in a way that's resonant to their day-to-day versus needing to call the sustainability team who might not have a deep understanding. So I think supply chain and procurement, those are huge areas where we're seeing that sustainability muscle being built as an extension of the sustainability team.
Yeah, I mean, Carol, what's kind of your take around that in terms of sustainability is everyone's job, right? As a tagline versus actually people believing it. And you mentioned, you know, supply chain and also in procurement, that's certain areas. Are you seeing that message of sustainability more broadcast successfully in certain areas versus others?
Yeah, I mean, I think for my customers, the message is always, you know, in their ambition to get to net zero and being critical players of the energy transition, what does that actually then translate to in terms of how things have shifted, right? And we're starting to see a huge increase across all of the customer base, across things like, you know, I mentioned earlier, EVs, flexibility programs. I think about smart meters all the time as, you know, as a steward of sustainability, and people might look at me funny and be like, how is a smart meter? But it's like, well, hey, if you want to reduce your consumption, you want to reduce your emissions, the first thing you need to do is figure out the visibility of how much you're actually using, right? And smart meters provide that. And I think about the story that, you know, we've recently launched a really great example of, you know, it's kind of all of the meat and guts, Hillary, that you were talking about kind of on the operational side and taking data. So the example that, you know, for our customers in E.ON in the UK, we've launched an AI solution where, so they've managed about 5 million smart meters in the UK. And some of the challenges, and I think the movement around implementing the smart meters is sometimes they don't work all the time, right? And then immediately after you implement these smart meters, sometimes you're gonna have to pick up the phone for service calls because the smart meter seems a bit off. And so what they told us was their problem was they had, I think, 135,000 visits to service smart meters, costing them over, you know, 20 million pounds in service, you know, the engineering fees, just the site visit. And so what they've done was they co-created and innovated with us a solution where customers could actually upload a 7-second video of what was going on with their smart meter. They upload it to the Eon portal. We're able to then actually, before it even gets to an engineer, use things like text track to actually basically analyze the video and then be able to come back with a recommendation right away. If it's a simple recommendation, engineer never has to, it doesn't even go to the engineer, right? Answer goes back to the customer right away. So when we think about that cycle around really operationalizing sustainability, right? Of how do you actually get sustainability products, in people's hands? Well, the first thing it has to do is work. And because you can imagine the flip side of this conversation of, if they're not servicing these smart meters well enough, people are just going to give up on things that really actually can move the needle. So they have to be really laser focused on how do they create a seamless customer experience so that they can actually then champion and actually be able to operationalize the commitment they're making at the investor level or at the board level or at the organizational level, right? And AI becomes a thread, and data and AI becomes a thread of actually making that possible, but also in the same time actually potentially improving the customer experience and raising the bar on what good looks like using technology to make it really seamless. And I think these are the nuggets that I find really always interesting when we're talking about this, because, going back to your point of no longer are the days of making these big, bold statements of what does sustainability mean, but it's actually now the second layer, especially for my customers, of what does that mean at the execution level of being able to hit a net zero energy transition goal. What does that mean for a customer? Well, they need to deploy smart meters, they need to deploy EVs, they need to be able to manage the grid. And so, but then to be able to do that, the fastest way to do that is to be able to apply technology, because otherwise you're just going to go back to some of the same challenges you would have had in a legacy operations and business. So it's quite, you could argue it's maybe nuanced to follow that thread. To me, it's clear and it's exciting because I get to work in it every day, but it's all around how do you make things real for customers, right? In a way that's very seamless and also really exciting to use, right? How do you get people excited about their smart meters? Well, first it has to work really, really well and get people, to back it and understand that it becomes a big, important piece of your individual sustainability or energy transition goals, right?
Yeah, and it's a better customer experience, right? Having that deeper engagement. And, we were at that phase of, you can't impact what you don't measure, making the invisible visible. Well, now we have the challenge of all of these different data sources and physical assets now being connected. How do we turn it into insight, intelligence, actions, refine it and automate it so that, for me, the best kind of sustainability is sustainability by default, where it's undetectable, where you're not asking for actions to be taken, but it's very much embedded.
It just
works.
And I think that's one thing that, obviously for us, we represent both Amazon Web Services and Amazon. And one of the big things that we always talk about in Amazon is, we are the world's most customer obsessed company and really working backwards against what the customer wants. It's all well and good that the organization needs to meet certain targets, but what does it fundamentally mean in terms of that customer experience and that customer value? I'd be interested to find out, when it comes to that customer experience and working backwards against what they want, is there more that organizations can do to really incentivize the customer to be part of the sustainability journey? How far are we to getting to the point where, as you said, sustainability is by default in the customer's head, where it's low friction, but it's going to help them in terms of that experience? Are we finding that there is that shift from the public perception of sustainability? For myself, when everyone bought Priuses back in the day, 15, 20 years ago, it was bought as a bit of a status symbol, right? So it was something that people chose to. But I think we wouldn't want to have sustainability as a choice. It should be by default. So where are we, if we were to shift 10 years in the future, do you think we would get there in terms of that sustainability as a default message at the customer level? I'd be interested to hear.
I mean, it's a relatively easy one for me because, again, the language of sustainability in my world is around, okay, so going back to your point on public perception is how can you deploy more renewable energy, because it's a better experience because it's sustainable energy, but it's also cheaper for the customer, right? So if you can kind of bring those two together, the customers are all for it. It's very much how do we get there faster? So the problem never sits with the customer. The problem is they're happy to, I think, engage and say, yeah, we absolutely want cheaper, more resilient energy that I know that is coming from a green source, right? We've heard that, for probably decades ago in terms of the first launch. Now we're finally getting to a point where renewable energy can be produced more cheaply than traditional sources. There's lots of other challenges. Then we get into the grid, then we get into policy, we get into some other challenges. But I actually think in the energy side, without the customer, this conversation, they're the ones really driving the needle and driving the message that this is priority for them. It's now, I think we're currently at a time where it's a bit sitting with the combination of the regulators, the government, and the generators, right, and the suppliers, and they're working. They are working, and I think what I've heard from some of my customers is this, forced mechanism, and forced also because of incumbents and new entries like the Octopuses of the world that show them it can be done, is driving new behavior. And so that's the space. I think we're in a really exciting space right now where some of the sustainability, I really love that sustainability by default messaging is now embedded. So to be able to get to the goals of sustainability and energy, it's very much the consumers driving that mission.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, from an organizational perspective, this is really around being a future fit business. It does have those operational efficiency savings, but also, looking ahead, for organizations that have existed for, years, decades, how we, drive sustained and sustainable growth in 5 years, 10 years time is going to look very different from how we've been successful, now and in previous years. So I think there is just that piece of, becoming a future fit business. And I think from a sustainability, just kind of a selling sustainability perspective, we like to always talk about, does it provide, ultimately we're all people, even at the very top leadership level, we're all driven by, motivators individually. But, when you think about a sustainability solution or product or an initiative, does it have a functional benefit? Is it cheaper, easier, faster, saves you time? Does it have a social benefit? Like you said, the Prius at the time, is super cool. Green is the new black. And does it have an emotional benefit? I think previously we were talking about folks who want to work for organizations that have purpose and are having a positive impact. But now what we're seeing is actually folks want to work in organizations where they as individual in their day-to-day can have a positive impact, whatever that looks like, combined with their domain and functional expertise. So I think, from those kind of expectations, we're really seeing the driver for sustainability to be embedded, much more at the core, built in versus bolted on.
Yeah, and actually that's a really good segue. Like you mentioned around having that good message, and we always talk about data for good messaging in terms of, there is this nefarious kind of plot around data, being used, in the black market and so on, but there's a really good play in terms of data for good. And I'd be interested, as a really good footnote as part of this episode, but both of you as leaders in tech, and also both women as well, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts around kind of what brought you to working at Amazon Web Services and Amazon, and how has your career been shaped by that data for good or sustainability for good story? So maybe over to you, Hillary.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a very interesting one, and I'm observing some very interesting trends in sustainability. But for me, my background hasn't been traditional STEM. I come more from an environmental law and policy background. And my journey in sustainability has really been, where can I have the biggest impact? Is it working as a part of NGOs, or is it working in communications and media, using that as a platform? And where I landed was really looking at the private sector and the collaboration around that to really drive impact. And in the years that I've been working in sustainability, it has really moved from just operational to commercial. It's become a lot more technical. As we were saying, technology is really going to be playing a big part. We know that from a survey we've done, 75% or 76% of organizations think it's impossible for them to meet their sustainability goals without technology, and yet less than a quarter of them are effectively doing so. But I think, the other piece is it's becoming increasingly financial as we're valuing, climate assets, nature assets, all of those things. And what I've seen is, when it comes to an inclusive leadership, diverse leadership kind of perspective, as we start getting into capital, carbon, and code, we're starting to see, the subject matter expertise of women who've been working in the space, those numbers go down. If you look around kind of the global landscape, the number of women in chief sustainability officer positions is above 50%. But as it gets, again, more technical, commercial, and financial, that number goes down. Often I find myself in, as the only, woman in these conversations, when I know from my kind of academic and professional past that we have tons of women who are subject matter experts in the space. So I think there's a real need to combat any kind of perception that business, financial acumen, and technology expertise lives independently from some of the kind of skills and innate characteristics that we see demonstrated in a lot of women in the professional setting around empathy, stakeholder engagement, care, and social impact. We've seen studies, even in purchasing decisions, when it comes to women, leaning more towards that kind of environmental, social responsibility. So I think as we move forward, as technology, sustainability roadmaps really intersect to deliver ultimately business financial value, we need to make sure that the voices of subject matter expertise that exists often within operational functions in the business don't get left behind. So I think that's kind of the thing I've been observing, and an area I'm really passionate to, keep building, which is making sure that inclusive leadership approach applies to sustainability as we see it, embedded across businesses.
And I guess final thoughts from yourself, Carol, if we've got people tuned in to the audience, and there are aspiring women who want to go into a career in STEM, what would be the advice that you would give them in terms of how to kind of step into the unknown, such as in tech with Amazon Web Services, or maybe sustainability? What would be your tips and tricks?
Yeah, I mean, I was reflecting, Hillary, as you were saying, even though it came from a very different path in terms of, in my path through energy, which is obviously very STEM oriented as well, but landing to where you want to make the most impact. And I think it's hard for me to pick any other organization outside of Amazon where I feel like you can make a bigger impact, given what we represent in the overall ecosystem in terms of our renewable buying capabilities, what we're doing in terms of sustainability at the operational level in our data centers, through to kind of the conversations I have day to day in terms of how do you apply AI to our energy customers, right? And I think going back to your question is it's going to be really cheesy what I'm about to say, but it's be the change, right? I'm going to quote Nelson Mandela and say part of it is, it's easy. It's an easy kind of overall statement, but what I mean by that is, I think what we're seeing in the data is earlier in your career, the propensity of women, even in these male-dominated fields, is usually higher, right? And then over time, as you advance your career, they typically, in certain areas, they can actually drop off a cliff, or they can decrease, right? And I think what we've done very well in Amazon is we've had good leadership commitment from the top down of making sure that there are a good representation at the leadership level, but then it also requires you as an individual level to lean into roles that you might think, I take a look around, there's not that many people that look like me or sound like me, or have my background, but hey, I think I'm qualified, so give it a shot and lean in and look for your allies and look for your sponsors. I think that becomes really, really critical in thinking about how you navigate your career, right? Because I think gone are the days where it's very linear, where you just go, this is the job, and then you're going to become a senior version of this job, and then you become the executive version of this job, right? It's become much more lateral about picking up different pockets of knowledge in your role then. Like, what is it that you want to get out of this role right now, and taking a look at it through that lens, and then how do I then apply that and use that fungible, skill set to the next role, and then build your role laterally. So it's not a perfect science, but I think so much of it comes down to leaning in as an individual and just saying, like, I'm going to try it and give it a go, and then finding the right sponsors to make sure that you're championed, and you're also you've got coaching along the way. And I think that's become so important. And reach out, right? Like, I think the final piece of advice I'd give is, the number of times we get pinged on Slack or even on LinkedIn where it kind of starts off almost apologetic, right? Of like, hey, I know you're probably super busy, but I'd love to, grab, and it's like, no, let's turn that narrative around of like, I really want to learn from you. I really value your mentorship. Is everyone you're going to reach out on LinkedIn going to get back to you? Probably not, but, leaning in and kind of putting yourself out there to look for those sponsorships and allies. I think you'd be surprised at how many people, if you're genuine, you communicate why you've done your homework as to why you think it's a good fit. I think people are quite responsive to helping you. So I think that's what I would say of when you're thinking about a career in STEM. Don't let the figures scare you. There's lots of opportunity for women and women of color in particular to make great strides in their career.
Yeah, and I think, personally for me, being able to have a helping hand, have someone to mentor you and really lean in has always been of assistance. But particularly in this current day and age with AI helping to, almost make it freely available for anyone to be able to be there in tech, you probably want to lean into, well, what does tech mean for you in terms of your domain experience? What are you passionate about? And today we've talked a lot about sustainability, but there'll be other passion subjects that people have that are tuned in. So maybe lean into what are you passionate about, and think about technology as an enabler for you to enact change, rather than, hopefully not just focusing only on the skills on technology and then hoping for the best. So I'd like to thank both of you for joining us today on this really insightful chat on sustainability and initiatives that we have here at Amazon Web Services and Amazon, and hope, those who have tuned in will listen to us on other topics that we have coming up in the next few months. All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.